I'll never forget the unsettling experience I had 5 years ago. I was 20 at the time, a carefree college student who loved exploring new places and capturing the beauty of nature through my camera lens. Born and raised in the heart of the Midwest, I had a penchant for adventure and often sought solace in the serene landscapes that dotted the countryside. It was during one of my summer breaks that I decided to take my parents' RV to a picturesque seaside destination for a 3-day retreat. They owned a quaint, cozy camper that was perfect for solo getaways. The idea of spending a few days by the ocean, with nothing but my thoughts and the sound of waves crashing against the shore, was too enticing to pass up. I packed my essentials, loaded my mom's old bicycle onto the RV, and set off early one morning, eager to escape the hustle and bustle of city life. The RV park I chose was a charming spot nestled between the coastline and a small, sleepy village. It was the perfect base for my short adventure. About 3 miles away from the park was a renowned tourist attraction, a historic lighthouse perched on a cliff, offering panoramic views of the ocean. I decided to make the trip there on my second day, hoping to capture some stunning photos. That morning, I woke up just as the first rays of sunlight began to peek over the horizon. The sky was painted with hues of pink and orange, promising a beautiful day ahead. I quickly got ready, grabbed my camera and a small backpack, and set out on my mom's old bike. The journey to the lighthouse was a mix of quaint village streets and a picturesque country pathway that led directly to the cliffside. Riding through the village was a delightful experience. The streets were lined with charming cottages, their gardens bursting with colorful flowers. The locals, though few, were friendly, greeting me with warm smiles as I pedaled past. After about a mile, I reached the beginning of the country pathway. It was a lovely, tree-lined route, flanked by wildflowers and lush greenery. The air was fresh and crisp, filled with the scent of pine and salt water. As I cycled along the path, I noticed an old, abandoned railway track running parallel to the trail, elevated slightly on a grassy bank. The tracks were overgrown with moss, and the trees surrounding them cast dappled shadows on the rusty rails. It was a scene straight out of a postcard, and I couldn't resist the urge to stop and take some photographs. I carefully propped my bike on its stand and climbed up the bank, my camera in hand. The sight before me was mesmerizing. The juxtaposition of nature reclaiming man-made structures was something I found particularly captivating. I snapped away, lost in the moment, completely absorbed in capturing the perfect shot. I was so engrossed in my photography that I didn't notice a man approaching until he was right by my bike on the path below. Startled, I glanced down and saw a middle-aged man, probably in his mid-50s. He was slightly overweight, with a scruffy beard and glasses that made his eyes look unnaturally large. He was dressed in black trousers and a blue waterproof coat, an odd choice for the warm weather. His presence immediately made me uneasy. He didn't greet me or smile. He just stood there, staring up at me with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. After a few moments of uncomfortable silence, he finally spoke. "Are you taking pictures of the birds?" he asked, his voice gruff. I forced a polite smile and nodded. "Yes, they're very pretty," I replied, trying to keep my tone light and friendly. He continued to stare at me, not saying a word. There was something off about his demeanor, something that made my skin crawl. I tried to focus on my photography, but his gaze was unnerving. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke again. "I saw a bird with its head broken off down there," he said, pointing to a dark, overgrown path that branched off from the main trail. "Do you want to see it?" My heart skipped a beat. The way he pointed to the dense, shadowy forest path was deeply unsettling. I quickly shook my head. "No, "Thank you," I said, my voice trembling slightly. He didn't move. He just kept staring at me, his eyes cold and calculating. "Are you sure?" he pressed. "It's just down there." I glanced at the path he was pointing to. It was an unofficial, muddy trail leading into the dense forest, a place that seemed to swallow all light. The idea of following him down there sent waves of fear through me. I took a step back, clutching my camera tightly. "No, thank you," I repeated firmly, trying to convey a sense of finality. The man didn't seem to get the hint. He took a step closer to my bike, blocking my way back to the main path. My heart was racing now, my mind screaming at me to get out of there. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, pretending to call someone. In reality, I was dialing my mom's number, hoping she would pick up. Seeing my phone, the man hesitated. He raised his hands in a placating gesture. Okay, he said, taking a step back. "I'll leave you alone." With that, he turned and walked away, but not before casting one last, lingering look in my direction. I watched him until he was out of sight, my heart pounding in my chest. As soon as I felt it was safe, I grabbed my bike and pedaled away as fast as I could, my hands shaking on the handlebars. I called my mom as I rode, my voice trembling as I recounted what had just happened. She was alarmed and urged me to return to the RV park immediately. When I finally got back, I locked myself inside the RV and checked every cupboard and closet, making sure no one could get in. That night, I reported the incident to the local police, describing the man and the eerie encounter in detail. They took my statement seriously and assured me they would keep an eye out for any suspicious activity. They also praised me for my quick thinking and urged me to always trust my instincts. As I lay in bed that night, my mind replayed the events over and over. The man's cold stare, his unsettling request, the dark, foreboding path he wanted me to follow him down. I shuddered at the thought of what might have happened if I had said yes. Maybe he was harmless, just an oddball with a morbid fascination. But something about the way he tried to lure me into the forest felt deeply wrong. I decided not to let the incident ruin the rest of my trip. The next day, I ventured out again, but this time, I stayed closer to the RV park and made sure there were always other people around. The beauty of the seaside and the warmth of the locals helped ease my nerves, but the memory of that man lingered, a dark shadow over an otherwise perfect getaway. Years have passed since that eerie encounter, but the lesson I learned that day has stayed with me. Always trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I often wonder what became of that man and whether he ever tried to lure someone else down that dark, muddy path. It's a chilling thought, but one that serves as a constant reminder to stay vigilant and aware of my surroundings. From the earliest I can remember, my life has always been meticulously ordered and sheltered, thanks in large part to my overprotective but loving parents. Growing up in Maple Grove, a small suburban town that boasted a blend of charming old brick buildings and sprawling new developments, my days were largely predictable and safe. Except, of course, for that one sketchy stretch of Main Street that I had to pass on my way home from the local community center every Friday night. At 13, I finally earned the privilege of walking to the Grove Teen Hangout by myself, or, at least, halfway by myself. My best friend, Ellie, lived a few blocks closer to the center and would meet me halfway. Our parents had to meet and approve of each other, which was a standard procedure in my household. Trust in my family was something to be built and carefully maintained. The hangout was our small town's attempt at keeping us teenagers out of trouble, charging a mere $3 for entry and providing a space filled with arcade games, a snack bar, and the latest hits blaring from speakers that were probably older than most of us. It was only open on Friday nights from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m., a window of freedom that I cherished deeply. The route to the center was straightforward and well-lit, except for the last 4 blocks, those that skirted past the infamous corners of Main Street, where neon lights flickered and music thumped from the 4 bars that each claimed a corner of the intersection. Despite its reputation, I had never felt threatened there. The people who frequented those bars seemed to exist in a world separate from mine, and they paid me no mind as I hurried past. But everything changed one chilly October evening. The air was crisp, and fallen leaves crunched under my sneakers as I made my way home, buzzing with the residual excitement of an evening spent laughing and playing games with Ellie. We had parted ways a couple of blocks back, and I was now walking alone, the familiar path stretching out before me. That's when I noticed him, a figure across the street, his presence like a smudge on the otherwise clear night. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, or perhaps a shadow cast by the flickering neon of the bar signs. But as I walked, stopping occasionally to peer curiously into shop windows, I realized he mirrored each of my stops. My heart began to thump loudly in my chest, a mix of fear and the adrenaline of the unknown. To test my growing suspicion, I paused at a window displaying an array of vintage comics, pretending to examine them while watching his reflection. Sure enough, he stopped too, his silhouette looming and unmoving. A shiver ran down my spine, not from the October chill, but from the realization that this was no coincidence. With each step towards the dreaded intersection of the bars, my anxiety grew. The usually comforting sounds of laughter and clinking glasses now seemed ominous. Yet, the closer I got to the intersection, the more I convinced myself that I was just being paranoid. After all, I had walked this route countless times without incident. The man kept pace with me until I reached the bustling corner. There, amidst the roar of motorcycles and the rowdy patrons spilling out of the bars, I saw him turn around. Relief washed over me momentarily as I hastened my steps, eager to put distance between myself and that unnerving shadow. I didn't mention the incident to my parents. In my mind, nothing had really happened, and telling them would only result in unnecessary restrictions. Little did I know, it was just the beginning. The following Friday, the same unnerving sequence unfolded. This time, I confided in Ellie, who immediately suggested her mom could drive us home next time. But I stubbornly refused, not wanting to admit that I was scared or to lose my hard-earned freedom. That decision would soon lead to a confrontation I could never have anticipated, one that would test my courage and alter my perception of the familiar streets of Maple Grove forever. Despite my growing anxiety, the next Friday found me treading the same route home. The air was colder now, the promise of winter whispered by the early dusk. As I left the safety of the community center's bright lights, I couldn't help but glance nervously across the street, half expecting to see the silhouette that had haunted my previous walks. For a few blocks, there was nothing, just the rhythmic sound of my footsteps and the distant laughter from houses along the way. But as I approached the sketchy block, there he was again, like a ghost emerging from the shadows. This time, though, something was different. He crossed the street, moving towards me with a purpose that sent a bolt of fear straight through my heart. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath visible in the cold night air. He was close now, close enough that I could make out his features. An older man, around 6 feet tall, not particularly heavy but imposing nonetheless, with dark hair peppered with gray and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. "I just want to talk," he called out, his voice unsettlingly calm. Panic clawed at my throat. I turned and ran, my heart pounding fiercely. The sounds of the night were drowned out by the rush of blood in my ears. I was almost to the intersection, to the safety of the bars and their boisterous crowds. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps quickening. "I just want you to be my daughter," he shouted after me, a plea laced with desperation. Tears blurred my vision as I sprinted into the neon-lit chaos. I was so close to the bars, to the people who might help me. I screamed for help, my voice cracking with terror. The crowd outside the bar turned as one, their faces a blur of concern and confusion. I felt a strong hand grab my arm, pulling me back. I struggled, thinking it was him, but then a familiar, gruff voice broke through my panic. Hey, it's okay. You're safe." It was one of the bikers I'd seen around but never spoken to, his face etched with worry. He was a large man, his arms covered in tattoos and his beard a wild, untamed thing. Around us, the other patrons were reacting, a couple of them detaining my pursuer. The biker held me steady, his grip firm but not unkind, as I collapsed into tears. The next few minutes were a blur of flashing police lights and murmured questions. My parents arrived, their faces pale with fear. Instead of the scolding I expected, they pulled me into a tight embrace, their relief palpable. "We're just glad you're safe," my mom whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The police took the man away, his head bowed, the fight gone out of him. I later learned that he was a troubled soul, haunted by the loss of his own daughter years ago. His mind had twisted reality to the point where he saw her in me. He was seeking help, they said, but that night all I could feel was the lingering echo of my terror. Raised in the warm, albeit strict embrace of a Christian household, my life was as structured as the rows of pews in our local church. The values instilled in me by my loving parents were clear and deeply rooted, guiding me like the stars guide a ship at sea. They weren't harsh or overbearing. Rather, they set boundaries with the best of intentions. Of course, like most teens, I tested these limits, sometimes bending them, occasionally breaking them. The summer before college marked a turning point in my life. I was 18, freshly graduated from high school, and teetering on the edge of true independence. That was when I met Johnny, or rather, reconnected with him. He wasn't new. Our paths had crossed before in the hallowed halls of our high school. Back then, he was the quintessential jock, captain of the football team, brilliant enough to snag a full academic scholarship, and now, he was just a short 4-hour drive away at the university I was bound for in the fall. Johnny was effortlessly charming, with a smile that could light up a room and a sense of humor that matched my own penchant for pranks. Our friendship quickly blossomed into something more during those long summer days. He had an apartment on campus, which became our little haven. I could escape there under the guise of visiting friends or claim I was spending the night at a local girlfriend's home. My parents, blissfully unaware of my budding romance, believed I was just enjoying my last summer before college. Our connection was deep, but not physical. Raised with a strong moral compass, I held on to the values my mother had instilled in me, particularly about not rushing into physical intimacy. Johnny seemed respectful of my decision, a fact that only endeared him more to me. However, one particular visit in the middle of that fateful summer would challenge everything. I had 3 days off work and set out early to drive up to see him. The excitement was palpable, the kind of giddy anticipation that fills you with butterflies. We spent the day in blissful silliness, Nerf gun battles, devouring Stephen King novels, and stealing kisses in between. Dinner out in the town felt like a dream, a perfect date from a teen movie. But the night took a dark turn once we returned to his apartment. Johnny, who had never pressured me before, had a box of condoms casually placed on his counter. I reiterated my stance, firmly stating nothing would change that night. His reaction was chilling. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, hard stare that sent shivers down my spine. "You make me sick," he said, his voice calm but laced with an anger I'd never heard before. "I'm tired of your games. You're dead to me." The words were like a slap, harsh and shocking. My heart raced as I realized this wasn't a joke. Not this time. I felt trapped. His apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. I sat frozen at the dining room table, my back against the wall, as he stood ominously still at the other end. The options ran through my mind: jump from the balcony, run down the hallway to the front door. Each scenario seemed more terrifying than the last. As Johnny's rant continued, outlining a horrific plan of assault and murder, a survival instinct I didn't know I had kicked in, I stood up, mustering every ounce of courage to project calm I didn't feel. "You're funny," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I almost believed you for a second. I lied about needing to return home immediately, a flimsy excuse about helping my dad in the garden." My hands trembled as I held up my phone, a silent prayer on my lips that he would believe me. The tension was palpable as I edged towards the door, my heart pounding with the fear of what might happen if he didn't buy my act. Thankfully, he didn't follow as I made my way out, down the stairs, and across the parking lot to my car. The relief of closing the car door behind me was immense. Yet as I drove away, the gravity of what had just occurred began to sink in. By the time I reached the safety of a well-lit Walmart parking lot, the dam broke, and I sobbed over my steering wheel, alone and terrified. The drive back home was the longest of my life. In the following years, I buried the memory deep, trying to forget Johnny's betrayal and the terror I felt that night. It wasn't until 4 years later that I finally shared the ordeal with my mother, beginning the long process of healing and understanding. Processing through the shock and betrayal took years, and even then, I never fully escaped the shadow it cast over my life. In the aftermath, I secluded myself somewhat from the world of dating and intimacy. College became a sanctuary of knowledge, where I buried myself in books and lectures, steering clear of the social whirlwind that consumed many of my peers. It wasn't until my senior year at university that I began to cautiously open up again. I joined a few clubs, made new friends, and even started attending therapy, a decision that proved to be invaluable. My therapist, Dr. Ellis, helped me unravel the layers of fear and mistrust that had built up since that terrifying night with Johnny. She taught me that what happened wasn't a reflection of my choices, but rather an exposure of his character. Therapy was hard, often painful. It meant revisiting that night over and over, each time peeling back a little more of the denial and confusion I had wrapped around the memory. I learned about triggers, about my body's automatic responses to certain cues that reminded me subconsciously of that night. Sounds like the click of a door locking could send my heart racing, a response I worked through with grounding techniques and mindfulness. As I healed, my relationship with my parents evolved as well. I had kept the incident from them initially out of a misplaced sense of protecting them, and perhaps myself, from the reality of the situation. When I finally did tell them, their reaction was a complex tapestry of anger, sorrow, and overwhelming support. My mother, ever the anchor, held me as I explained everything, her strength bolstering me. My father's quiet anger was not directed at me, but at the man who had threatened his daughter. Rebuilding my sense of safety took time. I started practicing self-defense, finding strength in the capability of my own body. The physical empowerment was a balm to the psychological scars that lingered. It also allowed me to reconnect with my body in a way I hadn't been able to since that summer before college. Graduation was a bittersweet moment. I had made it through, stronger and more aware, but the path had been nothing like what I had envisioned as a bright-eyed high school graduate. With my degree in hand, I decided to move to a new city, seeking a fresh start where the memories of my past wouldn't so easily find me. In this new environment, I thrived. I landed a job that challenged and excited me, made new friends who knew nothing of my history, and started to explore life through a new lens, one that was cautiously optimistic but no longer naive. One evening, out with friends at a local cafe, I met Michael. He was a friend of a friend, easygoing with a quick, genuine smile that seemed so rare in my cautious world. We clicked instantly, talking for hours as the cafe emptied around us. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of something that resembled hope, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, I could have something normal again. Dating Michael was a journey of its own. He was patient and kind, never pushing me beyond my comfort levels, always ready to listen. He didn't know everything at first, but as we grew closer, I shared my past with him. His reaction was one of protective anger, but also a profound respect for the strength it took me to trust him. With Michael, I learned that love after trauma isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about finding someone who makes you feel safe enough to remember. Today, I live a life that is rich with love and tempered by experiences. I work as a counselor myself now, helping others who have walked through the shadows of trauma. Sharing my story isn't just about healing myself. It's about lighting a path for others who feel as lost as I did once. Looking back, I can see how every step, every stumble, and every leap forward was necessary. From the terror of that night with Johnny to the warmth of my kitchen on a quiet morning with Michael, each moment taught me more about resilience, trust, and the endless capacity of the human heart to heal. My journey isn't over. Perhaps it never will be, but I move forward each day with a profound gratitude for the lessons learned and the love found along the way. Living in a small town, you get used to a certain quiet rhythm of life, surrounded by the comfort of familiar faces and landscapes painted with sprawling woods, serene lakes, and meandering rivers. My hometown is exactly like that, a place where everyone knows each other, or at least recognizes one another's cars and dogs. It's the sort of town where you can't help but feel safe, insulated from the grim headlines that seem to belong to another world entirely. On an unremarkable day back in the summer of 2008, I found myself pulling into the gravel lot of our local mom-and-pop gas station. It's one of those places that doubles as a grocery store, where you can grab a can of soup, a bag of chips, and top off your gas tank all under the same sun-faded sign. After picking up a few necessities, I headed back to my car, my mind already on the chores awaiting me at home. As I started the engine and rolled toward the exit, a white van turned into the driveway. Instinctively, I paused to let it pass, preparing to offer a friendly wave, thinking it might be my friend's uncle. He owned a similar van, and it wasn't uncommon to run into him around town. However, as the van drew closer, I realized I was mistaken. The man behind the wheel was a stranger, and not just any stranger. The moment our eyes met, a chill ran down my spine. He was an older man, with deeply set eyes and a hard set to his mouth that made him look like he had never smiled in his life. But it was his eyes that really struck me. Cold, mean and piercing. They seemed to look right through me, leaving me feeling exposed and uneasy. I quickly looked away and pulled onto the road, trying to shake off the discomfort that clung to me like the summer humidity. I drove home, my mind racing with thoughts of serial killers and criminals, the kinds of characters I'd only ever encountered in true crime books and late-night TV shows. By the time I reached my driveway, I had convinced myself that I was being ridiculous. After all, not every creepy stranger is a monster. But that brief encounter stayed with me, a dark cloud over an otherwise bright day. Months passed, and life went on as usual until one evening. The local news broke a story that sent shockwaves through our community. A woman from our town had disappeared, last seen talking to a man with a white van. The details were scarce, but the description of the man sent a shiver down my spine. It matched the stranger I had encountered at the gas station. The community rallied together. Search parties were organized, and local authorities worked around the clock, but the woman remained missing. It was a grim reminder of the fragility of our idyllic small-town life. Then, in late 2008, the news reported a horrific crime that occurred in Georgia. A young girl had been kidnapped and murdered, her body found near Blood Mountain. The suspect in that case was arrested shortly after, and it wasn't long before investigators linked him to other crimes, including the disappearance of the woman from our town. The man was identified as a serial predator who had been living among us, unnoticed and undetected. He had traveled through several states, leaving a trail of unspeakable violence in his wake. The realization that I had once looked into the eyes of such a man, that he had been a silent specter in our community, was deeply unsettling. The case eventually led to a conviction, bringing some measure of closure to the families of his victims. But for those of us in my small town, the shadows lingered. We were left with the uncomfortable knowledge that evil doesn't always lurk in some distant, unknown place. It can hide in plain sight, passing you in the driveway of a local gas station. As the story of the man and his white van unraveled in the media, more locals began to come forward with their own unnerving encounters. Each story shared was a piece of a horrifying puzzle that none of us wanted to see completed. Our small town, once a place where doors were left unlocked and neighbors were trusted implicitly, had its sense of security shattered. The revelations brought not only fear, but also a profound sense of betrayal. One such story came from a woman named Linda. She had met the man at a gas station not far from town, a few months before the tragedy unfolded. He had approached her under the guise of seeking directions to a campsite that didn't require registration, a place he implied he could stay for free, perhaps hinting at his desperate circumstances. Linda, ever compassionate and seeing a person in need, had provided him with directions, unknowingly pointing him toward an area frequented by locals for family picnics and summer outings. Afterward, Linda watched him drive off in the direction she had pointed out, never suspecting that she had just interacted with someone so dangerous. The horror of her realization, once his identity and crimes were revealed, was overwhelming. She confided in me one evening that knowing he knew where she lived haunted her for many nights, a fear that was palpable in her tremulous voice. Then there were the college girls who had encountered him at the beach during the summer of '08. They remembered him as the nice, unassuming man who had occasionally joined their group for beach volleyball or shared a drink by the bonfire. They had chatted with him, laughed at his jokes, and never once sensed the darkness that lay beneath his affable exterior. When they later saw his face plastered across news channels, connected with such heinous acts, the betrayal struck deep. It tainted their memories of that summer, turning what should have been carefree days into a backdrop for a predator's hunting ground.